What design thinking does is it allows you to kind of think about something, but then try something out, test it, right? And also what you do in design thinking, I mean, my favorite thing about design thinking, I think, is the first part, this inspiration mode, where it's all about empathy. It's really about understanding who do we want to benefit? How do we want to benefit them? And how do they need or want to be benefited?
Welcome to Forward with NACCE, Inspiring Entrepreneurial Action, a podcast that shares the stories of everyday entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial leaders, and the communities that support us. We hope that this diverse collection of stories brings you inspiration, inspires you to take action, and ignites entrepreneurship in your community as we make our way forward together.
Welcome to this episode of Forward with NACCE. I'm Rebecca Corbin, and I'm happy to be here again in the NACCE studio with our partner Airfluence to hear the story of Jim Woodell. He is the founder, principal, and CEO of the Venn Collaborative, and I've had the opportunity to work with him and his partners, and I've just been inspired by the work that they're doing. So welcome to the program, Jim. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing very well, Becky. Thank you so much for having me here.
Great. Well, I'm glad that you're here, and you and I had the chance to start to do some work together in 2022, and we're going to talk about some of that. But to begin, Jim, tell us a little bit about your story, because you've got a really interesting background, and share with us what led you to the career path that you're on today. Let our audience know who you are.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I had this prior life before doing what I'm doing now. For about 20 years, I was working in the world of academic technology and distance learning, and I managed the technology programs for universities, including distance learning programs. Like I was the manager of the online programs at Southern New Hampshire University. And then I also worked at a community college doing the same thing, North Shore Community College outside of Boston. I really enjoyed that work, but around 2006 or so, I was starting to think, if I'm going to spend my career in higher education, I ought to get a PhD. So crazy, at 40 years old, I decided I would start a PhD program, which I did at Penn State University. And while I was there, I kind of discovered this idea, which I just had never really thought about before, that colleges and universities help, in addition to sort of graduating students and doing the research that they do and things like that, they also are big drivers of community and economic transformation. And I thought that was really cool. It's interesting that I hadn't thought of it that much before, even having worked in colleges and universities. But when I sort of realized that, I was like, okay, this is something I want to know more about, and decided to focus my doctoral research on how a public research university oriented itself towards economic development. And then I got a job at the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, APLU, and that was the focus of my work there, helping our members think about how can they bring their impact to new levels by thinking about new ways of partnering and collaborating and strategizing for impact.
Yeah, that is such a great background. And it occurred to me, I didn't realize that you went back and earned your doctorate a little later in life. I did the same thing. I was working at community college at the time, and they had a sort of a casting call. They said, anybody who might be interested in earning a doctorate. And I showed up along with 20 other people. And by the end of our 3 years together earning our degrees, there were 4 of us left. We called ourselves the Fab Four because we stuck with it, did the research. But I had an epiphany similar to yours when I was working on my master's degree at the University of Akron in an urban studies program, of really how a public university could really make tremendous impact in the community. So it's really interesting that our association work and our efforts collide. One of the things that I was really excited to hear more about, and I think people would be curious about this as well, is, your entrepreneurial journey. So, you talked about your background and working in an association, and then you kind of decided to go off on your own and create this Venn Collaborative with some family and friends. So tell us what that journey was like, and maybe give us some idea. I think I know what the name implies, but maybe you could share that with everybody.
Sure, absolutely. I'd be happy to. So I had been an entrepreneur once before, had kind of struck out on my own in my 30s and had done some consulting. And then it was all focused on building online professional development, in particular online professional development for teachers. because I had been doing some work in the K-12 universe in addition to working in higher ed technology. But this time I had been at the association APLU for 7 years. I had built a really tremendous network there, thankfully. And, that, as you know, entrepreneurs can sometimes feel a little bit of butterflies when they decide they're going to go ahead and go out on their own, do their own thing. I felt a lot less of that because I felt really confident about my network. And I knew that when I went out and started doing this work independently, my network was going to sustain me. I had no idea just how well it was going to sustain me. And I feel very fortunate that, starting in 2018, in October 2018, when I left APLU, I immediately had work, and I've had work consistently throughout. And that's been fantastic. I did it because I've been working at this national association. You understand this. When you're at a national association, you get this great view of everything that's going on across the country. You see all of these different practices and ideas and approaches, and it's really cool. But what you don't get is really close to any of those activities, right? You don't get to be sort of in them. And I wanted to be more in some of those activities. I didn't want to go so far as to get a job at a university because I didn't want to kind of just be looking at one place, because I really liked that national purview and looking across multiple institutions. So I decided that consulting would be the way to go, because then I could get involved in projects, but not be just focused on one particular institution or community. So that's kind of how I made the entrepreneurial leap. There are days when I think to myself, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. This is, not something I should be doing. I'm not a business person. But, we all learn, and we kind of muddle through, I guess. And that's sort of what I feel like I'm doing sometime as an entrepreneur, not around the work. The work I feel confident about. Running the business, that part I feel like I need some help with. And so I'm so grateful that I actually work in this universe of entrepreneurs, because I get an opportunity to learn where the resources are and where the helpers are with regard to entrepreneurship.
If you don't mind, I'm going to share with you a resource. It's an open source resource that NACCE has available to all entrepreneurs to help, like, with the business side of what they do, because some of them are subject matter experts like yourself, and they're good at getting grants and things like that. But sort of the business modeling side of it, it's through our NACCE's partnership with Verizon Business Digital Ready. So it's all these really cool videos that can talk about different aspects of building a business, whether it's that or a nonprofit. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because one of the things that we've worked with them on is designing a URL so that we can kind of track how many people actually use these resources. And we've had a chance to go on the platform, and it's amazing that they're all free. Obviously they're not free because they pay for them, but
Right.
but I love what you said about your venture out in 2018. And I think a lot of us, myself included, can relate to the fact that some days you're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Because we're confronted with constant challenges, right? Just the virtual world, which I think we've all gotten better at. Sometimes funding challenges. And we could probably share with our audience how you and I and some of our colleagues got connected through the Corbin Foundation. And that was very fortuitous, because we've worked with them over many years, and they've gotten to understand kind of the value of community college and how we can get our network sort of up and moving very quickly through our association. And one of the things that Andy Stoll saw, who is with the Corbin Foundation, is really that alignment of networks, combining efforts. So maybe what you could share with us a little bit is about this project that I mentioned, that was kind of fostered through some work that a colleague of yours did at UW Oshkosh, and some other things. But just as an example, to give people an idea of, like, what are these kinds of projects that Jim works on, and why is this network of people and higher ed sort of fueling, I think, the growth of your own business, but also of ecosystem work that we're all doing together.
Yeah. So let me just start with this, which is that, when I left my job at APLU, I brought with me a conceptual framework that we had developed while I was there, along with our member institutions. Very simple framework. We spent a lot of time talking about how do universities contribute to community and economic development. We developed this, seemingly simple framework, but there's really a lot behind it. But it's essentially a Venn diagram. thus Venn Collaborative. And the
Mhm.
Venn diagram is got three circles: talent, innovation, and place. And the idea was that colleges and universities contribute to economic and community development across these areas, right? It's not just one set of things. And importantly, the reason we drew it as a Venn diagram was to say working at the intersections of those areas is really important because you're actually going to have a higher scale of impact. So that's where Venn Collaborative comes from. And it's informative to your question because I have always, in that work that I was doing at APLU and the work that I've been doing as a consultant, I think very broadly about ecosystems. Ecosystems to me are not just entrepreneurial ecosystems. They're ecosystems of talent, innovation, and place. And how do you make those ecosystems happen? Well, certainly entrepreneurship leads the way a lot in these ecosystems, right? But there's a lot of other considerations beyond the entrepreneur and the entrepreneurship that's going on. In fact, in order to support entrepreneurs, we have to think about all of these elements. Entrepreneurs want great places to work and live, right? They need good talent and access to good workforce development resources. So this broad idea of ecosystems was something that I developed at APLU in partnership with another organization. You were talking about networks of networks. We very much operated in a network of networks mode when I was at APLU. And we partnered with UIDA, the University Economic Development Association. And we developed that framework. And in fact, if you go to a UIDA meeting, you see talent, innovation, and place everywhere. It's very much a kind of core sort of logic of the organization. So at UIDA, and I was on the board of UIDA for a bit, and we got some funding from the Lemelson Foundation, which I know you're also familiar with. And the Lemelson Foundation supported UIDA to look at how can we take the principles of design thinking and apply those to ecosystem building. So we got a group of universities together, about 10, and we asked them to bring their ecosystem partners, chambers of commerce, entrepreneurial support organizations, and a variety of others. We had about 100 organizations doing this activity of applying design thinking, basically, ideation, a lot of discovery work, and coming up with new ideas about how to strengthen those ecosystems. And that was great work. We really enjoyed it. We called it the Ecosystems Design Network. Through that work, I worked with my colleague Jeff Soxie from the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, who's soon to be president of UIDA. Jeff and I thought that there was some really valuable follow-on work that could happen. And we met Andy Stoll, who of course is interested in entrepreneurial ecosystems, as we know. And we talked to Andy about the possibility of UIDA potentially in partnership with a number of other organizations, including Jeff's institution, UW Oshkosh, taking it one step further and looking really at how not only could we sort of experiment with universities and colleges in their role in entrepreneurial ecosystems, but really develop a set of tools and a framework that will help those institutions, as well as their ecosystem partners, kind of identify what the right role is for those universities and really understand how to leverage the assets of an institution of higher education, post-secondary institution, in the ecosystem. So this toolkit that we're building, and we're very happy, Venn Collaborative is very pleased to partner with UW Oshkosh on this, but also with NACCE and with APLU and UIDA as additional partners to help us really think about this. Because we think what's going to happen with this, what we certainly hope will happen, is that universities will have new tools for really understanding how they can best contribute to entrepreneurial ecosystem building. And they'll really have a better sense of connectivity across the ecosystem. Universities, colleges can, as you know, sometimes be kind of siloed and sometimes think of things in very kind of narrow ways. What we want is for colleges and university leaders to be able to think more broadly about how that ecosystem works, what all the connectivity is, and for their ecosystem partners who already know what the value of colleges and universities are in their ecosystems, but to help them really leverage it, because they sometimes find it hard to work with a college or a university because they're big and complex places. So we're really excited about this toolkit development project. We're very grateful to the Kauffman Foundation for supporting us. We're very pleased to be partnering with NACCE and others to deliver what we think is going to be a really valuable tool.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting too. I know NACCE's annual conference is going to be in Nashville, Tennessee, at the end of October, and I think it'll be great to see all of that, come together. I think the other thing that you mentioned that I think is really important is the idea of leverage, and everyone sort of has their strength and their role to play. And I think about that in the context of projects, because I know you've done this in your work in many different ways. But if you have an institution like UWO or MIT or something like that, there's this enormous bureaucracy that's just inherent in the work. They have to manage millions and millions of dollars and people and all of that. And sometimes aligning with an association or even a community college can help them, because it leverages that nimbleness and flexibility if partners come together and trust one another. And I think the design thinking process is a really robust one for that, because you're sort of leaning into everyone around the table, kind of contributing to defining a problem and trying to ideate on solutions, ultimately to test it. But Jim, could you just tell us a little bit more about design thinking from your standpoint? Because it's a tool that you use a lot. People may not have heard about that before. So maybe give us a little bit more information and context around, what design thinking is and how you use it.
Yeah, sure. So I first got exposed to design thinking when I was working at the association and would work with folks who were tapping into the College of Engineering around the entrepreneurial efforts or the technology transfer kinds of things that could come out of those schools. And I learned that engineers used something called design thinking, and that was part of their everyday work. I have to say, for a while, I kind of thought, well, that's for engineers. Design thinking is not for the rest of us. It's for people who really, are solving like really highly technical problems and things. Well, then I discovered that it is actually for the rest of us. It's for everybody. And it's a set of tools that can really help you to really kind of either break through or advance things, move things along very quickly. In particular, you mentioned trust. In particular, I think that design thinking, what I learned about it was that it helps break down some of the barriers that exist, which include trust, when you're working in complex collaboration, right? When you have multiple organizations and different folks. So I got really excited about it. And in fact, it was in the first year of the pandemic a couple of years ago that I finally decided, I keep talking about design thinking. I'm really interested in it. I just need to learn more about it. So I enrolled in the Advanced Certificate in Design Thinking with IDEO University, IDEO being a big design shop in California that, very connected to the Stanford Design School and, really kind of promulgated this idea of design thinking from the very beginning. Anyway, I had a great time doing, by the way, I'd recommend that certificate program to anybody. It's a fantastic set of content and it's delivered incredibly well. It's designed very well, as you might imagine.
Yeah.
So I learned all these new skills and tools. Like I kind of knew what design thinking was, but I actually learned how to move from the process of inspiration to ideation to implementation and what that meant. And to do it in a way that was sort of open-ended and agile. In the world of universities, you think about things like strategic plans and grant initiatives and so forth, and they're all very kind of linear, right? People think, well, we're going to lay out the plan and then we're just going to move forward lockstep and implement it. And of course, that's not how the world works, basically. But what design thinking does is it allows you to kind of think about something, but then try something out, test it, right? And also what you do in design thinking, my favorite thing about design thinking, I think, is the first part, this inspiration mode, where it's all about empathy.
Yes.
It's really about understanding who do we want to benefit? How do we want to benefit them? And how do they need or want to be benefited? And really kind of, doing discovery interviews and really developing empathy for the user or the audience or the beneficiaries, whatever term you want to use. So I got really excited about design thinking, and I thought, there's this whole thing about ecosystem development going on. Colleges and universities are thinking about what is their role in ecosystems, whether those are entrepreneurial ecosystems, talent and workforce development ecosystems, community development ecosystems. I think that this design thinking is a really great way to sort of break down some of the barriers that exist to making the complex collaborations happen across many different organizations. I'm also a practitioner of a methodology called strategic doing. And in strategic doing, we do a very similar thing, which is we think about how can we break down these barriers and move very quickly in a complex collaboration into actionable steps. Well, design thinking is very similar. It's a different set of ideas, but there's a lot of overlap. But at the core of it, I would say we go right back to the thing that you mentioned before, which is trust. What I see the value in design thinking of being is that it kind of puts everybody in the space where we're all understanding what we need to do here. And we're all going to share ideas, and we're going to appreciate each other's ideas. And then we're going to try them out, and we're going to see what works, and we're going to learn from that. And if we fail, all the better, because we've learned something and we can make something even better. So that whole idea of kind of really taking chances collaboratively and building trust around that, I think it's so vital in this work that we call ecosystem building. And I think that, even if it's not sort of saying, well, we're going to take design thinking and implement it as a model for how we do things, even if it's just taking bits and pieces and the lessons that can be learned from things like empathy and iteration, and being willing to create and try things. These are little pieces that can really infuse a lot of energy into ecosystem building, in my view.
Yeah, that is beautifully said. And as you were talking, I was thinking about all of us wrestling with how can we do more with diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And the process that you just laid out and some of the things that you gave us to think about really show that something like a design thinking where you're bringing people together to solve a problem together, and in the process they're building trust, they're understanding one another, and if we do it right, everybody feels like they belong because everybody's part of the solution. So it's just very interesting to think about. You've shared with us some resources. I hope people that are listening will think about following your example. You could A, go back and get your doctorate, or B, you could get a certificate from design.
I'm not sure I recommend the first one.
You don't recommend that one. Okay, got it. And also, I would throw out there too, Intuit is one of our corporate partners here at NACCE, and they have a really interesting design thinking tool called Design for Delight. And so they use some of that online. It's their own version of it. But just like you said, it all begins with empathy. So Jim, I thank you so much for being here with us today. It's been a great conversation. I feel like we could talk for hours, but you've given all of us a lot to think about. I'm grateful for our partnership and just knowing you and the work that you do. So I wish you a good day, and thank everybody who tuned in today to take what you've learned and make your life a little bit better.
Thanks so much, Becky.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope that you will continue to explore the many ways to define entrepreneurship with NACCE as we celebrate opportunity, failing forward, and success, learning from one another along the way. Subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform and follow at NACCE on social media, and learn more about us at nacce.com/podcast. Stay tuned for a new episode each week. We look forward to making our way forward together with you.